Hello everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire. Welcome back to my sewing room. Yesterday, or whenever you watch this video, we worked on Ottoline's head. So Ottoline the Otter, there she is in all her lovely glory. And today I thought we'd start and work on her body and her limbs. They are similar to the other characters, so if you have already seen those videos, you may be happy just to carry on straight ahead. There's not a lot of difference other than Clementine, sorry. Well, Ottoline has got a white chest piece, so I'll do that bit first, and then if you want to just watch that video then you can do, but if you want to watch the rest of it then join with me whilst we bring Ottoline to life. Oh, just another thing as well, I need to say a really huge thank you to Georgina Bird, who's the sponsor of our video for Otttoline, our 2 videos for Otttoline. So Georgina sponsored the video through sending me a payment on coffee. So I want to say thank you very much to Georgina for your kindness and your support, both on behalf of myself today and also on behalf of everybody who watches this video. We really do appreciate your generosity and your kindness, and I hope you enjoy the video dedicated to you. So yeah, let me get on with this and we'll sort out Ottoline's body and limbs. So in video 1 we sorted out all of our cutting out. So we dealt with copying off the pattern. I traced my pattern pieces off onto tissue paper or tracing paper, and how we needed to have 2 legs facing one way and 2 legs facing the other way, because I cut mine out on the single, not on the double. So we've got our 4 legs there, 2 of each orientation. We then have our arms here as well. Let's sort those out. So again, we're just getting these into the right piles. I've got 2 of one orientation and 2 going the other way, because we can see back from the thumbs, the way that the thumbs are going. So that's those. We've got 2 feet pads which go with the feet. We've got a side body with the dart on either orientation again, so that we've got a left and a right for that. We've got the tail, put that to one side. And then we've got the 2-piece body, 1 piece in white felt and 1 piece in the browny grey felt. So if you jump in straight onto this video, then please pop back to the video for Ottoline's head, because you'll need that one for where I talk about tracing off the pattern, how to lay your pattern pieces out, because the kit from CoolCrafting, if you're using that, presumes that you'll be hand sewing your character. And therefore, on some of the pieces when we are machine sewing, we added an extra 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side. So therefore, we use up more felt. So when we are cutting these characters out, if you are going to be machine sewing, my recommendation is that you lay all of the fabric out, all of the pattern pieces out in one go at first, before you start cutting anything out at all, because that way you can make sure you've got enough felt for all of your character. And in fact, I did run out of felt for Hamish when I was making Hamish for his horns, and his horns had to be in a different colour felt. But, you know, so long as we know in advance, we can accommodate it. So let's just pop these other pieces to one side. And we've got our pieces here. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is pay attention to any notches or any tailor's tacks. So on here, I've notched in the centre of the body there. I haven't notched here on the centre of this body, because that will give us somewhere to do. So I'm just going to fold that in half and just put a little notch just in there. Again, I will only notch where I've got a seam allowance. If we're on a piece where there's no seam allowance, then I'll find a different way of marking my pattern pieces, because I don't want those to show when on the finished article. Now, I've not done these notches here. So again, a notch is just a snip into the felt, which is just a couple of millimetres. But it's just enough to show you where that, to mark that little point. So that, in this case, I'm marking the legs of the darts. Oh, that one's been done already. That's fine, that one's been done. Okay, and then the other marking process that I really love, and if you're a regular to my videos, you will know, is that I love a tailor's tack. So for those that haven't seen these before, let me find my black pen. Excuse my squeaky chair, it seems to decide sometimes it wants to squeak and other times it doesn't. So I use a contrasting thread, and I then thread my sewing needle. I could do with my glasses on where I can find the end. There we go. Okay, so I thread my sewing needle so that my thread is double. This is just ordinary sewing thread. You can get special tacking thread actually, which is really nice, but I haven't got any yet. Maybe I treat myself next birthday. Okay, so we get 2 layers. We don't put a knot at the end. And then what we do is we locate the end of the dart, and there's quite often a dot at the end of the dart. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put our needle in. Now we need to go all the way through to the other side of the felt. You can't just go through a couple of fibres, so these tend to be a little bit bigger. So make sure you can see your needle, your pin through, your needle through really. And then we leave a tail, and that stitch goes north to south, and then your other stitch crosses it at east to west. And what you're wanting is for where those stitches cross over to be a little cross on the other side, like that. Now we're just going through one single piece of felt at the moment, but I use these in dressmaking, and then we're going through multiple layers. So if ever you want to know how to go through multiple layers, then we'll talk about that on one of my dressmaking videos. But for now, we're just going to cut through the loop and cut our strands off, and you're left with this tufty piece of thread. So then when we take our pins out for our pattern piece, we're going to leave one on so it reminds me what this is, and then ease that off gently. Hold on to it if you think your threads are coming through, and then you've got that exact position marked on the front and on the back there. So that's the position for the dart on this one. So you'll need to do that on both of these pieces, but not on the other one. And then we've done that, we're going to go across to the sewing machine, and we're going to start by joining these 2 pieces together. Okay, so working on this piece first, because we need to get these straight, don't we, in order to be able to do the rest of the body. We're taking the tummy, which is out of our grey-brown felt here, and then we're taking the chest piece here, which is out of this white felt, and that's going to go onto the top just there. Let's put our pattern pieces out of the way so they don't go anywhere we don't want them to. Now, what we need to do is we've got a notch in the centre of our pattern piece here, and also in the centre of the tummy piece there. And what we're going to do first of all is put a little pin, and we've got these right sides together now, so make sure, yeah, that's my right sides together. So make sure that these are lying right sides together, and then we're going to pin this piece just here. Because what we want to do is stitch this and then flip it back up again. Now the first thing you're going to notice is saying, well, this isn't going to fit because look, that curve goes this way and this curve goes this way. It will. It's very similar to doing what's called a princess seam when you're dressmaking. It's just need to just fiddle with it a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is take this side here, and we're going to match up those 2 cut edges just there. No, we're not. We're going to do it the other way around. So we're going to take this side here, and we're going to match it up to this side. It's the same principle, it just depends on which way round you're going to sew it on your sewing machine. Now, I'm not actually going to put any more pins in there. I'm going to hold that with my finger and thumb. You can, whilst you're working, just to get your machine sorted out if you need to, just put a pin to hold it. I'm not going to try and do this piece as well, because that gives us a really sharp curve that we're going to struggle to try and sew. But all we need to remember is that this has got a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that's where the 2 pieces of felt need to match. So we've just got those together, just lay them across. They might not reach right close up to the corners together, but that's okay. We can neaten that off when we get there. And we're going to do this as we go along. So let me get my machine. Make sure that you can see without too much whiting out. I think it's better just there. Okay, so I've got this threaded up with the thread that came with the kit, which is like a dark grey. Let's get my pedal ready. Everything moves under my desk when the fairies come in and use my machine when I'm not looking. So I'm going to now move my needle across so that I've got my 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'll go that way actually. Because I only want a part of the presser foot to be on my felt, because if we have the majority of the presser foot on, it's going to make it more difficult to manipulate with this type of thing. So just make sure that you've got 1/4 inch on your machine, and that's how I do mine. Keep my finger against the edge of my presser foot, put my measure against it, your ruler or you tape measure, and make sure that from the needle point to the edge of my presser foot is 1/4 inch, and that is our seam allowance. So the next thing that I'm going to do now is pop this under here. A couple of stitches forward, And the felt's quite thick, so you might need to just help it slightly. And then I'm going to drop my needle down into my work. If you've not got a button that does that for you, use your hand crank on the side of your machine, and that will help you hold that in place. So I'm going to take that pin out now because that's done its job. And I just need to take this pin out as well because we've got it started now. And we need just to kind of keep that angle going. It's going to curl up behind us as we start sewing, but we're going to just keep that 1/4 of an inch going for a couple more stitches. And then we're going to then lift our presser foot up, and then we're going to pull the white across so that it matches a few more stitches. Presser foot up and pull it across. And what we're trying to do is just get it so that the two edges of the felt underneath that presser foot are just meeting. And then just by pressing the presser, lifting the presser foot up and then moving it across, you'll see that you can do a few stitches and it'll just start to curve for you and attach that in this curved way. It feels weird, but it does work, as you'll see. So again, our ends are now matching up, so now we can just sew off the end with a reverse stitch on the end just there. Okay, let's lift this presser foot up. So we can see it's trying to curl up behind us, which is great, that's what we wanted. And we're going to snip off our threads. And then when we come to this now, if we open that up, that's all stitched beautifully in that curved edge. So that's the way that we do that. We have to make sure you miss the end of your snips as well. So this is why the keeping to 1/4 of an inch seam allowance is important. And the other thing that we can do is we can use our pinking shears, which are scissors with a serrated triangular edge, and we can just trim this off slightly just to help this just lie a little flatter. So if I just take out some of that bulk just there, you can see the serrated edge there. It does just help it just sit a little bit nicer. If you haven't got pinking shears, and let me just show you how much I've taken off. So I've only taken off a small amount of the felt, just the edges. It does just help reduce that bulk. Then you can take your snips and you can cut little triangles out this way. And you get the same effect, a little bit longer, but you get the same effect, and that will also help this all just sit really beautifully on top of each other for Otttoline. So let me just finish that edge off because I've got my little pinking shears. So they are a bit of an old-fashioned tool. I think they've got a bit of a bad name really, the pinking shears, but they're really helpful. Okay, so that's all we need to do for that, is just take that bit at a time, just do a few stitches and just pull those raw edges together as you're going around the corners, and you'll end up with this lovely straight seam if you hold it sort of that way, but then when you just push it up, then you've got this beautiful flat seam there that makes everything work well there. So that's the tummy piece. The next thing we're going to do is get our side pieces ready. So we're going to locate the notches on the side. This is the right side of our fabric, so we're just going to pull those out of the way slightly for our tailor's tack, our threads. So but the first thing I do is put those two snips so that they lie right on top of each other, and then hold it with my finger, and then I work in towards the cross that we've got, which is for our tailor's tack. I then know where I am heading, so then I put a pin along the line between the two and come out at my notches pretty much, so that I know where that is. So let's get the other one ready as well, so we've got that one to do it together. So locate your notches on your side, you can see them there, 1, 2. Put those on top of each other first, and then press your felt together so that your cross is right on that edge, the end of the tailor's tack. And we always sew from the notches towards the point of our dart. Again, this is the same as we use a dart in our dressmaking. Then we're going to go to our machine here, and we're going to start stitching from the notches, but we're going to stitch off the fabric when we get to the point. We don't reverse at that section there. So let's pop that in there. Let me just move my needle back to the middle so we get that straight. And your pin gives you a good idea of where you're starting and where you're heading to. So a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back. And again, I put my needle in my work, always, so that it's anchored. Then I take my pin out, And now we're going to sew, change our direction if we need to. We can lift our presser foot because this is now anchored with our needle through our work. We can now twist our work so that we've got it aiming directly towards the point of our dart, which is denoted by the tailor's tack. And now we're going to sew all the way over, and we're going to sew off the end at that point. Needle up. Now leave yourself a little tail. Don't go too tight to the end, but we can take these beginning threads off, because then what we're going to do then is separate out these ends of the dart, and then we're going to do 3 knots, and that is enough to secure the end of that dart nicely. And this is again, this is the same for dressmaking and for making characters. And then we can snip that off to about 1 centimetre. So that's what you end up with, is the dart with the stitches down. There's the end of our tailor's tack. We went right to the end of that, and those are our threads there that we use just to tie off the end of that knot. Now that we've done that, we can now take out our tailor's tack, and most of these threads should just pull out, and those ones all have. If you find you've got a thread that doesn't want to pull out, just go to one side and just snip the coloured thread just close to the end, and then go to the other side and give it a tug, because what it means is that the needle, your sewing needle, has pierced through one of these threads, and it just means that it knots up when you try to pull it out. So go ahead and do that for both of these, and then we'll come back and we'll start and put the body together. So on my second one, I have pierced through those threads, look, and so they're just not wanting to pull out. So I thought I'd just show you. So let's go this side, and on this side here, I'm going to cut those off close to the work, put those out the way. But then on the other side now, stuck on my finger, then if I just pull them, they come straight out without, oh, that one isn't choosing to. Oh, it's just been pierced. Okay, never worked quite on camera, but it does work when you need to. So it's just that the thread has just been pierced by the other thread. So yeah, so just pull those off, and they will just do. But so don't go yanking it, because you do run the risk of snapping your stitches that you've already done. And I did reverse stitch at the beginning of the dart as well, just to make sure that that was well secured. Okay, so with the body then now, what we're going to do is we are going to put these together so that the 2 darts are in the same position. And we are now going to sew. So we have to get those lined up together, because that's kind of like your starting point. But once you've done that, make sure your top matches up, because we are going to use the red pin trick that I like. So we're going to take this, so pin these sides together here, but we need to leave a back open. So where I'm going to leave it open, I put a red topped pin, because that indicates to me that I need to stop and start between those sections there. And then we're going to then sew down. I think there's a notch on the bottom here. So I missed that little notch just there when I was doing my cutting out. So what I'm going to do is pop this back onto pattern piece back on, make sure it's all lined up. The dot of my dart finishes on there, and then I'm just going to locate this little point here and just put a little snip in there. Let's do it the same way on this one here. So this is just a quick, because I'd forgotten to put that little notch on. Okay, so back to where we were. Darts on top of each other, and then it's the opposite side that we're going to be sewing. So let's get these top bits matched up, and a pin in just to hold those together. And then let's put a red pin in to say we're going to stop stitching there, and then a red pin in to say we're going to resume stitching there. Let's get our notches on top of each other, because that's where we're also going to stop stitching. So let's put another red pin just there. Have one just in the middle here. So all I've done is just using the red pins just to remind me that that's where we're going to stop. So we're going to start here with 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to sew all the way down to this pin. So we're going to reverse at the top and back, and reverse and stop there. We're then going to rejoin our thread here, so reverse there, all the way down here, and then we're going to reverse and stop just there. So So that is how we are going to work this body. Let's get to our machine. So again, we're going to use our 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let me start stitching and reverse and back. And then before we get to the first pin, I'm going to put my needle in my work again because we need to take these pins out, and that helps just anchor everything down. So if you can get into the habit of doing that, or if you've got the function where it's a button on your machine where it automatically leaves your needle in the work, then that's really good. So now we're just going to just gently follow the curve around. This one isn't too stiff, so too steep, so we can just follow it round. And then when we get close, let's take that pin out, but let's only go a couple more stitches or so. And then I'm going to reverse. Needle out of our work. Where's my snips? So that pin then has told us that we needed to stop, which we've done. And then we're going to start back in again where this needle is. Pin is just here. I'm going to stitch and reverse. Careful not to stitch in 2 pins. And then we're going to follow this round to the next red pin. If you need to, you can do what's called pivoting. So let's put our needle in our work. You can lift up the presser foot and you can then twist as you need to get around the curve. So let's just see how we get on. Some curves you can just manipulate around. You just have to put a little bit of pressure on with a bit of a twisting motion. But if ever your fabric starts to bunch up underneath the front of your needle, that is definitely when you need to be pivoting rather than just trying to manipulate it. So I'm going to pivot here. So I'm going to lift up my presser foot, twist the work slightly and back down again. And then we're going to then reverse before we get to our pin. So that secures our threads. Okay, so let's just snip those off there and those off just there. And so this is what we've got. So it's the opposite side to the darts that we've been sewing, and we've now got a gap. And that's going to be the turning gap where we're going to turn everything through. It looks quite tight there, so we've just got to bear that in mind. The next thing we're going to do then is take our other pattern piece here, and I think, yes, and we've got a notch at the bottom here. So at the bottom end of here. And that notch, when you open out the bottom edge of the body piece, when you've got your right sides together, that notch sits on that seam. And we're doing what's called a Y seam actually, you might have heard of that before. And I would pin from the other side because we want to have this so this body piece is flat against our sewing machine bed when we sew. So I'm pinning either side of that seam allowance there because we can't sew through that because that's a stopping point really. So what I'm going to do now is go round to the top. Does it go around the top? No, but we'll go down, we'll work our way through the sides. Now I push my darts down when I am sewing those, and I'm just matching the raw edges of our felt up together all the way around here. The seam for the body I'm going to push the grey felt up over the top of the white because I think that's the way that it's going to sit best. We're going to take this round to the top. Now when you get to the very top, you'll find that your felt wants to sort of stick out a little bit, and that's because you've taken 1/4 inch off here already. So we sew as far as we can do up to that point. But again, we need to stop when we get this side of the seam allowance because we can't do anything with that. So we're going to sew right up here till we get to that point there. But we can pin the other side so that it doesn't get in the way. And again, I'm going to pop that dart down. Just manipulate the felt under your hand. It's quite thick on Otttoline actually. It feels thicker than on some of the other characters. Just feels like a bit of a different quality, which is good. It's nice. Okay, and then up to this part here. Keep going up. Just hold it together with your fingers and your thumb while you just pin it. And then just smooth those right sides together. We're going back up here again. So this is what it kind of looks like. It kind of looks a bit triangular from the end. So we've got the body flat, and I'm going to sew it with that flat against the sewing machine bed. And I'm going to, with this body here, I'm going to push it to one side first, and I'm going to try and get my sewing machine needle right in where I stopped sewing before. And then at 1/4 inch, I'm going to start sewing round here. I'm going to keep my dart down as well. So you might need my awl, and if you've not got, this is my awl, which is basically a pointy tool, but I can hold things down with that whilst it's going under the presser foot, and as long as this doesn't get in the way of the needle, it'll help just move things along. So that's a really good tool to have. You can also use the point of a quick unpick. You've just got to be careful, that's more likely to damage your fabric because there's no blade on an awl, it's just a pointy tool, whereas if you're not careful, the blade can get in the way on a quick unpick. So we're going to sew along there, and then we're going to sew all the way up here, and then we're going to just manipulate this top bit here as best as we can, but remember that's going to be hidden inside your character's neck, but we just want to just pull that felt away and finish if we can at the top of those stitches there. We're going to then cut our threads, and then we're then going to move everything over the other way, and we're going to start where we were again, exactly on that point there, all the way down here, and we're going to end there at that point there, and then cut our threads. We don't need to leave a gap on either of these two sides because we've already got our gap for turning just in the back of the centre seam that we just, the back seam that we just did. Okay, hope that all makes sense. So let's have a go. So first of all, let's start from the bottom. I'm going to push my felt over to the left. I get my left and right the right way round, and I'm going to try and join my stitches pretty much where I stopped my previous one. So I've taken my pin out ready because we're underneath. I'm going to make sure those right sides are together, and I've got my awl, which is my kind of my extra finger without getting my fingers in the way. Make sure those raw edges stay together. Hold on to your threads when you start, and that will stop you from getting a nest underneath your threads, your work. Couple of stitches forward, couple of stitches back just to anchor those threads, and then needle in our work because we've got quite a tight curve that we're straight onto. So now we can start going round, and if you feel like you're not keeping up with the curve, just stop, lift your presser foot, adjust your curve, and then we can start going again. Right, we're coming to this bulky bit here, so we're going to carry on. Hold the edge of the dart down with your awl, and when you get close and it's underneath the presser foot, then you can then take the pin out, making sure your raw edges are together. Just use the awl just to pull it out from underneath if it's not, and then keep it round. Coming to close, a bit closer to that pin before we take it out. And then again, raw edges together. And close this pin as well, take that one out. Coming over now where the body and the seam allowance is pushed up, so that's going to be a little bit thicker there. So again, we've just got the body pressed down to the left, and this is all nice and flat underneath. Pin out on this one. And now we're getting up to the top here. Just make sure that this extra bit of body here is just tucked out so that you can get right into that corner there. I'm going to get a little bit thick here. I'm going to try and go all the way to the top, and then a couple of stitches just to reverse and hold that in place. And needle out of our work and snip our threads. And that's 1/2 done. So you can't do this all in one go. So we've just sewn around here now, and there's the seam allowance, you can see there, and we've gone right up as far as we can, almost to the very top of there in here. Okay, so now we're going to move the body of the bulk of the body across to the left again, but we're working now from the top. We're going to now make sure that's all out of the way. And then we're going to rejoin at 1/4 inch again. So 1/4 inch in, start and reverse, and then needle in the work. There's my organ. Ooh, hiding. Making sure your raw edges are together, and we can take out any pins that are going to get in the way. And we're just going to follow this down now the same way as before with our needle in our work, so we get our pins. Just shifted slightly, make sure that seam allowance is pointing upwards the same as the other one. You don't want to twist in it. And again on this side just here, just pull this out. Make sure that's all okay as we're going round onto that dart before we take the pin out. And then I am going to pivot just here because I can feel like I'm going off slightly. So leave my needle in the work, lift up the presser foot, just twist it round slightly tighter, and then round a bit more. And then take that pin out there because that's going to get in the way. And then a little bit more pivoting to get to the bottom here, and then we're going to stop where we start, where the bottom of this. So just around about there. Needle out of the work, press a foot up, snip our threads. Having a sneaky peek then, did you see me having a quick look? So what you want really is that all three of those stitches at the top on these different parts all start and stop in the same place. Really, ideally that's the perfect way of doing it if you can. Mine seems to have worked, which is good. And then again down here, you're kind of wanting it to join together again with a minimal gap or nothing at all. If there is a gap, we can go in afterwards and just hand sew it just to make sure that that's all okay. The other thing that I'm going to do is just take my pinking shears, and I am just going to take off a bit of this bulk around the edge of the seam, but just be really careful of your seam allowances because you don't want to compromise that at all. But it does just help the curvy edges sit nicely and not get bumpy. And again, I don't snip off where the opening is for the back, so don't snip off that piece. Literally just a smidge, if anything. Probably nothing else on there now. Just make a bit of a mess though, that's the only thing. And then what we're going to do then is we're going to put our finger inside. We're going to reach into one of the furthest points, and then we're going to pull the felt through. So I do find that if you just try and pull it, you can stretch this opening. So a combination of pushing the felt through does seem to help, and fold it back. And all the while you're just trying to get that felt just to go through that opening just there. And all of a sudden it'll just suddenly go. Just put your finger into that cone thing and hold on to it. So I've got my thumb on the inside and my finger on the outside, and push that through like that. And then just use your fingers just along those seam allowances, and that'll give you a nice shaped body. And this is where you can check. I mean, I don't think I need to do any extra stitches in there, but if you needed to, you could put some extra stitches in at the bottom there just to hold that together. And there we go. So this is called a Y seam, and you can see why. And that's a good tip to have. And it's a similar technique that I use for the feet pads as well, on the bottom of the feet, which you'll see later on. So there we go. There we've got Ottoline's body ready. So the next step then is to get your bag of stuffing, and now we're going to stuff this, and I'm going to stuff this really quite firmly so that it's going to sit nicely. So she's going to sit nicely, and then we're going to use a ladder stitch to close up this opening. So stick with me. I'll just get my bag of stuffing. I'll probably start and do most of it before I come back to you, just so you're not got to listen to the bag crinkling. And yeah, we've got a lovely pointy cone there at the top. So I do stuff this top part of the cone quite firmly because that's what's going to support the head, and we need it to be quite robust at the top there. So I've just finished stuffing my my character. I think that's about as firm as I want it to be, so hopefully that gives you some indication. It's got its, I've pushed the stuffing down into all of the bottom of it. Perhaps still a little bit more room. It's kind of, when do you stop? But you've got to just decide when you do stop. And the other thing, I've got a little thing that's just quite cute, and I'll show you what I do with that as well. Before we ladder stitch this together, just keep my needle out of the way so that doesn't disappear inside Otttoline with the stuffing. Yeah, I put little I've put little affirmations inside my character sometimes, and also I've also used some nice red felt and put a little heart inside as well. So if it is for somebody special, or if somebody's having a tough time, then it's just a way of sending a little bit of extra love or support with them, really, I suppose. So I'm just going to show you how I do that, just so that if it's of interest, then you can do the same. So let me just grab my supplies together. Okay, so I've got a little scrap of red fabric here. You can use any colour you like. I'm just going to draw on the back of it a heart for me to just to out. You can freestyle it if you wish to. I have done these in red felt as well. I just can't put my hand on my red felt at the moment. It just has a little heart on the back there like that, and then I'll use my snips or my scissors just to cut it out. I've said to you before, I keep a lot of my scraps if they're very small, because you never know when they come in handy. So let's pop this little heart inside Otttoline. There we go. I can perhaps trim off some of that white at the bottom. So it's a nice red heart. We've got that just there. So you can give it a kiss if you want to, whatever you want to do. So I just pop that inside the stuffing, somewhere heart kind of area. And then the other thing that I do is I've picked up a crafter's ink stamp, and I've also got some little bits of fabric strips that I use. Let's get one of these. So again, you can see it's just a little scrap that I've saved. And so what I do then is I use my stamp pad to stamp an affirmation word on there. So let's put love on here. So I'll just put my L, my O. And I've had these for a few years. The stamp pad I think I just got off, it was from actually a company called Otttoline Green, which is a bit of a different name, isn't it? Let's just do L-O-V. The worst bit is trying to remember what you've actually put inside each character. Not that it matters, because if they're all a positive affirmation that you've got. So we can make sure that stays nice and dry. Sorry, nice and sealed, so it stays nice and wet. And then you can then snip out your little word. Sometimes I pink the edges as well, depending if I haven't left enough room on this. So now we've got the word love, and so I just tuck that inside as well. So again, if you want to success or believe or dream or hope or whatever you want, you can pop those in there. And then that's hidden, but you and I know they're in there, and that's quite a nice thing to do. So the next thing that we're going to do now is, bearing in mind that we've got 1/4 inch seam allowance on both of these edges now, we're going to kind of tuck in that seam allowance to give us an edge, a folded edge. And then we're going to take a needle that we're going to thread with the same colour that we've been using for our character body so far. Let's do a knot in the end, put the two ends together. Excuse me. And then we'll do our quilter's knot. There is a video on my channel of how to do a quilter's knot. Okay. So we're going to do a ladder stitch for this to close this up. And what we do for that is we're going to come out with our knot a few stitches into our machine stitching edge, because that's nice and secure and means that we won't put any pressure on that knot point. So I just pull it through just till it starts to catch. I don't sort of tug it right the way through to the end, because we've got some, there's no pressure on those stitches there at the moment because that's all held by the machine stitching. So what I do then is do a couple of little stitches. So if you can see, I've come out just there, that point just there, and that's the end of my stitching. And now, let me just get my glasses on because this will help me. I use my thumb to indent the character so that I can get behind those stitches, and I'll take a couple of little back stitches in place that just anchor that knot into the felt before we actually need it to have any strength on it, because this character is quite well stuffed and so it will have some pressure on those stitches. So I hide that down inside the seam just there. Then what we're going to do now is a ladder stitch, and we take a stitch on the seam, on the fold of the seam allowance this side, and take our thread through, and then following on the seam allowance this side, we take a stitch through our felt here as well. So that thread spans over the gap that we've got. We then go back over to here again and take a stitch out of there again, spanning that gap. And we come again here and take a stitch this side, and you can do about 4 or 5 stitches before we need to tighten it. And it's called a ladder stitch because if you can see with my nail, look, the stitches look like the rungs on a ladder. Another stitch just there, and then we come to here and another stitch just here. So we've got about 5 now. Now watch the magic, because you can see the strands going across the stuffing. And if I now pull on this here, you can see that that thread starts to pull all the way down, and look how it pulls it, cinches it all in tight together. So let's just push the stuffing down inside. And the good news is that when you let go again, it doesn't unravel all the way down. The first couple might start to come undone, but not all the way down. So let's again do another stitch there. So you're always trying to get yourself right on the cross of that, so 1/4 of an inch in really from the edge, because that's where you're going to get the strength, and that's where we want to keep that shape all nice and smooth. A couple more stitches and then pull again, and you can see that start to pull together. And let's go back down here again, so keep going in, and don't try and go across in one go, because you just can't. You've just got to just do these stitches either side, and that really is the best way that you can get this body bit closed. And I use the same ladder stitch when I'm closing up the arms and the legs as well, so it's a good one to learn. As I say, as long as your stitches are looking like the rungs of a ladder, then you'll know that you're on the right track. And then, as I say, just being gentle, don't pull at it too hard. Give the thread time to adjust, and then as we start to pull, it then cinches it in all the way along. Okay, let's keep going. We're nearly there. I think it's a little bit of magic, this stitches, when it works properly. And it is working properly today, so we're going to give thanks for that. Okay. Nearly there. Give that a little cinch in again, because we're getting towards the top. Nice and invisible, and as I say, if you rough up the fibres of the felt, you can make it almost invisible. So we're trying now to match the seam allowance so that we're not going to get a bump on the back of Ottoline's back. So there we can see that's all going together nicely, and we can redistribute some of the stuffing once we've finished as well. Just make sure you keep your stitches nice and straight. And I go also up here, so being as we started into the machine stitching down here, we're going to end up in the machine stitching up here as well, because again that takes the pressure away from the end of your stitching. So I'm just turning it around again now. So we've got the character all, there's a bit of red thread there. We've got the character all closed up together. And if you think your stitches are too far apart, then you can just do the same thing, just going back down the other way again. Oops. So So you can just go back down, just make sure you still do that one stitch either side. If you try and do it all together, I think it does start to get a bit messy. So again, just use your stitches going back down here again, and it just puts an extra run of stitching down. Oops, she wants to jump out of my hand. All the way through. And it does just reinforce those stitches and just make sure that everything's okay. So just try not to get any loops in your stitching as your threads as you're going down. So I'm going to go all the way back down again. One stitch either side. Just make it super sturdy. And just remember, I don't know if I've said it already actually, I usually say it, so I thought I might have done. If you are making your character for a child, then just make sure you're using a nice child safe stuffing as well. Oh, excuse the noise outside. Okay. So again, just as we took those extra stitches before, then we're going to take those extra stitches again just down this seam here. Just use my thumb to indent in order to give you that room to be able to get your needle in and out. Those little back stitches are surprisingly strong. Okay, so once you've kind of got yourself ready, then we can come down a bit further. Don't lose the needle in your character, but give yourself a nice long tail. Come out in the body somewhere where you can pull it out, and then you bury that tail in there. If you put a little bit of pressure on your threads before you snip it, then the end of your thread will disappear into your body. And there we go, the legs obviously will stabilise this. So now you can just redistribute some of that stuffing and just make sure that that's all where you want it to be. Because the next stage that we're going to do is we're going to attach the head. So if we get our head that we did the other day, and if you remember there's a little lip on the edge of the felt that just needs to sort of fold in with it. We're going to put a little thumb hole in the centre of our head as well, because that actually fits and then pushes into the character. So the point of the cone goes into the hole you've created with your fingers. So let me just tilt the camera because you'll need to be able to see. Hold on. So make sure your stuffing's not coming out. And now we need to make sure that she's nice and straight. So the first thing we can do is we've got the notch on the back of, I brace the bodies against my body, and then that seems to help. So the little notch at the back of the neck is going to be a match point. So a little bit of the head, a little bit of the body, and then back into the head again to hold that down. And then let's come to the side here. We can use that all just to tuck in and tuck under that thread, and that throat there is going to match. So let's use this big pin here, it's a bit bent, but so let's take a little bit of there, bit of the throat, white for the felt, then into the body, and then into the head again, if we can, and out again. That's holding that so that matches. Let's come to this side here, let's tuck that felt under, and again this is going to match on this side too. So matching up this seam under the throat and down the side, so a bit of the head, through the body, that side seam, and then out again at the head. So let's have a look and see how she's looking. She's quite far down at the front. See if we can just get her head to just be a little bit further. But I think that's how she is. So I think there's about 1/4 of an inch there. Yeah, that's probably how she is. Didn't want it to look too much like she got her head on her chest, looking down too far. But I think by the time we've got her legs on, she's going to look good. So it's quite high up at the back there, so I might try and just move this one down here. Just try and correct that curve slightly. There we go. That's possibly slightly better, isn't it? So just check that you're happy with her. You know, have her looking at you. Make sure that you're happy with the way that she's looking. I think these seams here are designed to match up, which is great. And then, as I say, you want this centre back seam here to go in the middle of those two seams that are going down there, which I think we're about right with. So be careful of your pins though, because they are sticking out. She's looking good so far. You just want to make sure she's not too much to one side. Okay. I'll take that. That one comes out a little bit too far, I think. Okay, so it's trial and error. Just keep having a look at it and just see what you can do as well. So, and then I'm going to sew this bit here in white, and then I'm going to sew the rest of it in brown. So let's do this white bit. No, let's do the brown bit first, because then that gets rid of some of the pins, doesn't it, for us, before we have to actually work on the white. So let's get some thread. Quite a long bit of thread. You can use quite a long needle as well for this, because I find that helps too. I don't go onto my doll needles, but I'm using one that's fairly big. And take quite a decent amount of your thread. And let's do a quarter's knot on the end there. Start around this side. So the first thing I'm going to do is go the opposite direction, because I want to hide that knot up, and I'm going to come out on the edge of here. So I'm going in through the back here where I've got plenty of access in, and then coming out on the side there where her head is. And again, just do it until you get that pressure and you've just got the knot is tethered, but it's not really robust. And then we're then going to do a little stitch in her body, and another little stitch in that neck edge just there, just to hold that together. Just turn around the other way, because that was quite a big bite. So we're just trying to anchor that knot down really to start off with. Then what we're going to do is then take, doing almost a bit like a ladder stitch again. So a stitch out of the body, out of the head, and then in that crease we're going to take a stitch out of the body, quite a decent one, because we want this head to be really strongly held on there. And then we're going to take a bite out of the neck again, and I'd go and a bite out of the body. I do go around these heads 2 or 3 times to hold them on, because I do think over time that is a real pressure point for them, and I think that the more stitches you've got going round the better. But I think going round 2 or 3 times is better than doing lots of little stitches right at the very start. So let's take that pin out, because that's holding that one down for now. And then again, I think because you're having to do decent size stitches, because of making sure that you're attaching things nice and securely, it's not, you can't be delicate at this stage. So let's just span that seam allowance there. But we can refine it as we go round, and that's what I think. Each time we just do a few more stitches and it just holds it in better and better. So I'm going to take that pin out there, because we're finished with that one. Just make sure you put your pins out of the way. You don't want to be sticking your pins to get stuck, or your needle to get stuck into your character. Let's just span that seam allowance there, and then another one out of the body again. Take that one out, because that seemed like it was just pulling slightly. So right on that 1/4 inch that we had before. Tuck it in if you need to. We're nearly round to where the other side of the neck is attached. So again, you're wanting your seam allowances to be on top of each other, because that's going to give you a nice finish and not make a jog in your head attachment. So again, we're just going through the browny grey. I'm not going through the white at all at this stage. Another couple of stitches just there. Okay, so that's how we're attached at the moment. I'm feeling quite happy about that. So now I turn around and making sure that everything's all nice and neat and tight and together. Now we're going to go back the other way similarly, but I'm trying to keep those stitches now in the neck crease that we've created. Where's my glasses? I think I've got a loop in my stitches. I have just here. So I'm going to separate out my threads, and I'm going to pull on one or the other until that loop disappears. There it goes. Felt it go through. So that's got rid of that loop. And now, so you're trying to go really in between the stitches that you created last time, so it's creating another anchor point. It just starts to pull everything in nice and neatly. So right in that crease again, just to attach everything together nicely. I'm not kind of climbing more at the head or more at the body because I'm happy with how a head is staying on there, and there's no movement. That is absolutely rigid. Which is great. That's just how we wanted to have a nice firm head that isn't lolling to one side, and that's the best way I've found of creating it. I think if you're new to making Luna Lapin in the characters, you might be surprised how much of the neck actually gets lost inside there. So if we put this pattern piece on the bottom here, there's a dart leg, and if I show you that pattern piece next to the character, you've literally got a good inch that goes up inside the head there. And I think people might think the very top, but no, it's quite a big chunk that actually does go up into there. So just bear that in mind, because it's worth noting these points, because sometimes I think we just get on with it, don't we? And we don't always remember to look at and see what's actually happening. So again, just keeping those stitches nicely in that neck edge. And basically that's all I do. I know I'm labouring the point, you've probably got it. Fast forward if you've already understood what I'm saying and how I'm doing things. But again, just at that edge, I'm just going through the grey and not through the white. And again, if you think you need any more, or you're not happy with your stitches, then this is the time now on this pass just to neaten those up. And sometimes you can do 2 or 3 stitches in one go just to pull that all in together. So again, up, down, and it will refine it each time you go round. You'll be surprised. There's a little bit of a gap there, so we'll close that one up. Let's go in the middle of that gap, close that up. That's it. Again, just wiggling that needle up and down now is just getting those stitches to be nice and close together. It's too low. Okay, I'll turn that out and then do another one afterwards. So that's the finished back of my neck. And then all I do now is do a few little back stitches almost through those stitches and in place right in the very crease. And I have found that a really good way of securing that down. And then what I'm going to do next is then get out my white thread, and I do exactly the same with the white thread on the front of the character. So I won't bother videoing that to show you, because I think you've got the gist by now, I think, hopefully. And then when I'm ready, that I think I've cast that off enough, then again I'm going to leave a long tail, put my needle through my work, through the body, put a little bit of tension on it, and snip it, and those threads will disappear into the character's body. So yeah, so even without doing this front quarter here, you can see how her head isn't wobbling at all. But I'm just going to go on now and just do that white bit on there and get that all nicely tucked in and make sure that she's all happy with that. Happy with that outline, yeah? Is it looking good? And her throat and her chest is just all matched up nicely on those seam lines as well. Okay, so that's what I'm off to do next, and then we'll be talking about legs next, I think. Okay, so here's Otttoline now with her head all nice and firmly stuffed on. That's not going anywhere. There's no movement there at all, which is great. And she's looking nice and smart. Next thing I'm going to do is do her legs, because I think her legs are important to get her sitting nice and steady. And then I'm going to do her arms. Now, interestingly enough, I like this way of doing her legs better than I do the way that Luna has her legs. So I think if I ever do make any more Luna Lapins, I will do the legs this way. So just a little tip for you, so it might be quite interesting to see how that's done. Okay, so we have our 4 pieces of leg, an extra piece of cotton there that we don't need. And because I cut mine out on the flat, you can see I've got 2 points. Oops, can't, this way, which way? This way. I have to work opposite to the way that I'm thinking I'm going to work. So I've got 2 pointing to the right and 2 pointing to the left. And that will give us the right ones when we get going. So let's take the pattern pieces off here. I always keep my pattern pieces on my cut out fabric until the last minute, because then I can remember which orientation it is. But if you, for some reason you want to take yours off before then, if you remove your pattern, well, we've not done the tailor's tack for that, but if you remove your pattern, I would then stick a pin on the right side of my fabric, just like that, and just keep it one like that on all of them, and that will just tell you which one is which. But I have just noticed we've not done the tailor's tacks for the leg positioning, so let me just pop that piece back on again, and we are going to use our needle and thread. You've seen this before. Literally, I'm going to do a cross through the middle there. Done that one east to west this time, north to south, just to ring the changes. And this way here, then you find the snips that you've just tidied away. So of course you can't find them. There they are. Excuse all the clattering and banging. But everything disappears when you're not looking. And then we can peel that pattern piece back, and we've got our lovely tailor's tack there in the middle of our fabric piece. So I am going to carry on with doing those for the rest of my legs first, and I'll probably go on and do them with the arms whilst I've got the thread in my hands. There'll be a position for the arms as well, and I will do those too, and then I'll just pop back to you in a couple of minutes when we're ready to go forward. Okay, so I'm all ready for you now, and we've got 2 sets of legs, so we want right sides together. When we put the right sides together, the toes are pointing outwards. So we know that that's going to work. We're going to use our red pin trick again in order to make sure that we leave a gap. I usually leave it on the back of the thigh is where I choose to leave my gap. So leave about that much. So how much is that much? I'll be a bit more precise for you. So that's 1.5 to 2 inches, about 1 3/4 on mine. So let's see how that works out for us. And literally just pinning this all the way around now. The only bit that I won't sew apart from between these 2 red pins, change that pin for a different colour, that red pin there, is I don't sew across the bottom of the foot, because obviously we need to put our foot pad in. So we want that to be all together, all nice. And we're going to use those same pivoting techniques that we've already learnt and used before for going around this curve here and the curve at the top of the foot. So when I was saying about, I like these legs better, these legs sit on the outside of the character like this once they're sewn and stuffed, rather than inside a circular base like on Luna, and that's why I prefer it. Just be aware that if you've got anywhere here where your cutting out hasn't quite gone right to the edge, that because you'll probably be following the edge of the top of your leg, just trim that bit off just to make sure that you're not going to get confused. And then this one as well. Now, if you have cut your legs out of fabric and you find you've got right sides up to this way, there's nothing you can do about it, you know, where you've got a leg pointing one way and one point in the other. There's nothing you can do about it if they're both the if they're both in the same direction. You have to, if it's in fabric and the both sides are different, you'll have to cut it again. There's no way you can fudge that to make that work, unfortunately. If it's in felt and it's up to you as to whether you're happy to do this or not, you can just turn one over, obviously, and use the other side of the felt to the one that you were planning on using if it's not too different. And if you're putting boots on your Luna, your character, or you're putting trousers on, that type of thing, it may not be too noticeable, and you may decide that you're happy to do that. All personal choice as to what our tolerance is for errors, or just for design differences, aren't they, rather than errors, I suppose. So yeah, just pinning these all together. Going to put the 2 red pins again on the back of this one, roughly the same position as I did on the other one, about 2 inches apart. And then the rest of these pins are just going to go down. Now, the other thing that I do when I'm sewing mine is I stop 1/4 inch from the edge, because I want that seam at the bottom there to flare out, because that gives me a better grip of getting that foot pad in. Because if we're right down to the bottom and we're trying to get the foot pad in, it can be difficult to get to that bottom edge. But so again, it's an extra step if you're machine sewing, but if you've got that little bit there that flares out, it gives you something to hang on to with your sewing machine when you're going to start sewing it. So again, when I start at the toes and at the heel, I will leave 1/4 inch, because that's the seam allowance we need for the foot pad. So it all makes sense in the end. So I'm going to just go now and I'm going to sew here all the way round, curve round here, and stop 1/4 inch from there, and then I'm just going to sew this bit down here. Now, I do mine all in one go because I open mine out from here and then sew my foot pad in. I don't try and turn it or anything like that. I think in the instructions when you're hand sewing, you only sew half of it so that you can get to the inside to sew your foot pad, but we don't need to worry about that. We're ahead of the game. So machine on. Pop this in here. We're doing 1/4 inch seam allowance. Find my pedal. Hold on to your thread so you don't get a nest underneath. And then we're just going to reverse stitch a couple of stitches. Needling our work because we will be doing some pivoting on this. So we can start by turning it round just slowly. Take our pins out as we get to them, but here already it's just starting to get a bit stiff, so leave your needle in your work, lift up your presser foot and just turn your work, your fabric. I keep saying your work, but it's your pattern piece, the fabric, the piece that you're working on, and then just keep doing that, just because that's quite a steep curve. Come back down this other side. On a gentle curve, you don't have to worry too much. But around the top of the leg and around this section here, we will need to pivot. And basically, we're using the same seam allowance that we added when we were drafting out the pattern. So let's just go a couple across there. Getting towards the end, so we need to remember to leave that 1/4 inch seam allowance. About there will do. Just reverse stitch and then to cut our threads. And that's what we've got with our first pass round. So we've got started here, all the way around the top, nice and smooth, down to the bottom, around this bit here, down to the toe, but I have left that 1/4 inch free at the bottom of that seam allowance there. Okay. So now let's cut off our starting threads. Then we're going to sew up, starting 1/4 inch in, needle in the work because we don't need to pivot, but I always do when we're taking pins out. Just when you're about getting to that pin, you can just then reverse. Threads off and snip off. Okay, So because I often forget, what I'm going to do is while we're on this section here, I'm just going to trim this top section here. So I'm going to use my pinking shears, or you can do those little snips that you did before. And I'm just going to take some of this out just to give it a little bit of a room to manoeuvre when we turn it round. You're not trying to get so close that you compromise your seam, and I don't ever snip on this section here, which is the open bit that we need for stuffing. That's a straight edge, so we don't need to worry about it. So I avoid the bottom of that seam allowance there because we're going to need that. And then we're just going to come round here. And I can just do a couple of little snips a little bit closer into those seams there. That'll help that bit there, of course, turn out just nicely. Okay, covered everything on my desk again. So next thing we're going to do then, I'll do the other leg in a minute, is we're going to take our foot pad. Now, remember the anatomy of the foot pad, because one side is a bit more fuller on the circle than the other one is. So we've got the right side again, so that's our right side, and that's the top of our foot pad. So again, if we fold this in half, so it'll go in half, we can do a little snip at the top because we have got seam allowance on this, and a little seam at the bottom. And that just helps us get it perfectly in line. So I've got my right side up at the moment, so I'm going to flick that over so that the right side is facing the inside of the leg. And that little snip that we've just made on the foot, the thicker part of the foot pads, can you see there's a thicker part here than here? So that is the heel, the thinner part goes down towards the heel, and the top bit goes towards the toes. And this is again a place where I will tack this down, because, and we're ignoring red pins because we've got to sew all the way around. So first of all, I secure either side of the toe seam. A bit difficult on this dark thread to see, on the dark felt to see. Then I locate my snip at the back. I spread open the seam of my back, and I put the seam allowance of the little snip again in the other one, and then I pin either side of the leg seam allowance. And that anchors those first 2 points in for me, so that we've got the toe and the heel exactly right. Then what we can do is use our fabric it's just got to then manipulate around to fit onto our foot pad. Seems like there's a little bit extra actually, which is interesting. So we're going to have to ease a little bit in. So I'm going to put the pins on the outside, and see how that seam is a little bit longer. We can just stretch the edge of this foot pad a little bit, and the felt will just squish, technical word, squish, will squish in just to allow that just to sit still and to sit flat. Just move our pins along as well if we need to, just to give ourselves a bit more room. So that's what the first half is looking like. And if I fold those pins back, you can see that that foot pad is flat with no puckers in it at all. So let's do the other side. Let's just take that pin out. I think it's that that's making it not want to sit quite right. And this is your time to get the foot pad right, get the shaping of it. Right. Okay, I'm trying not to get any puckers on that seam line that we're going to be doing at 1/4 inch. I'll do that one. It should, she says it should sit in there quite nicely. Okay, I am going to tack this, as I say, because I think trying to manipulate around all of these pins is a recipe for disaster for your fingers. So I've got some thread, thread here, and what I do is I start at one side of the seam allowance for the toes here, make sure that that's going to be in there completely right. You're trying to bear in mind that 1/4 inch all the way if you can, and before long you get to be able to pretty much eyeball it, because we use it so much, don't we, for so many things. I think 1/4 inch, is it about 1 centimetre, I think, isn't it? So just do a couple of stitches in place first, just to anchor that thread down, because we've got to avoid all of these pins. And now I'm just going to, making sure my raw edges are together, I'm going to tack this at just under 1/4 inch, going through both pieces of fabric, felt. Oh, got caught on a pin. That's what I mean about the pins, they get in the way, don't they? Necessary, but get caught in the way. You don't want too big of stitches because you want it to have the control. So the bigger the stitches, the less control you have, the less it holds the fabric in the right place. So just bear that in mind. You don't need little teeny tiny stitches either, but you need something that's enough to hold your work in place, the bit that you're working on at the time. Oops. There we go. Pins everywhere. Let's take out the ones that we've passed. That's for that one. It's a little bit fiddly, but imagine how fiddly this would be if we tried to put this straight under our sewing machine and expect to get a good result. Just keep those raw edges together. Right, so we're coming up to a seam allowance now. So what you do is you take a stitch through the seam allowance, so through from front to back, because what we don't want to include that seam allowance, because we'll start sewing and stop sewing either side of that, a bit like when we did the body at the main part of the body earlier on. Just making sure those raw edges are together. And of course you can hand stitch this section if you want to. You just do the same thing as pretty much as I'm doing now, but probably use a small back stitch, and you would stitch these feet pad in place in that method. And then when you're happy, I'd probably go, well, you might go around twice, it's up to you, it depends how together your stitches are. If they're as big as this, I'd definitely go around twice. Right, so around to the beginning again, and so I'm just going to do a double stitch almost in place just to hold that whilst we just sew it. Take our backing thread off. So from this side here you can see that the foot pad is completely flat, and from the top here we've got no creases that have been sewn into the actual foot itself. The seam allowances are loose. So the seam allowances have been splayed in order to fit the foot pad into the right section in there. So when we sew, I'm going to do what we did on the body. I'm going to push the bulk of this over to one side, keeping the pad flat on the bed of my sewing machine, and then I'm going to sew it 1/4 inch around to there, and then reverse and stop. Break my threads, push all of this over to the other side, rejoin my sewing there, and sew again, reverse again, and then sew this section here and finishing at the toes with the toes pointed. So you're really wanting your stitches to start and finish at the bottoms of the seams that you've already sewn. That's the plan. So let me get these pins out of the way because we don't need those. As I said to you before, you need to just keep an eye on your pins. Pins aren't so bad, because, I suppose, because they've got a head to them. So then if they get lost, you're going to see the head. It's not so bad. But a needle sometimes, especially if you've got your body of your character around that you're sewing with, a needle can get lost really easily in there, just like it can in a pin cushion. So just bear that in mind to keep those out of the way. Right, let's start at the heel first for this one. So flat there. I'm going to move my needle across to the left, so I've only got a bit of my presser foot onto my actual piece that I'm sewing, and I've found that works quite well. hold on to our thread so we don't get a nest underneath when we start sewing. I'm going to do a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back. Now I am already starting to twist this as I'm sewing because it's circular, it's oval, isn't it? And I'm starting to put the pressure on to start and get this sewing round as we go. Foot in the work, needle in the work, that's what I meant. And just lift your presser foot up and just smooth the next sort of like 1/2 inch. So the next 1/2 inch, presser foot up. Just keep manipulating that fabric out of the way and the foot and the bulk of what you've sewn already, just out of the way, so that when you come to your next bit, you've got a nice clear run. So you want that circular shape. I'm coming up to where the bottom of that seam is, so do a double stitch there. And this wool's so felt, this felt is so thick. So I've just missed that by a couple of stitches. Can you just see just there? A couple of stitches just missing. But at the back here, that started just nicely. And we've caught that all the way round. So now, we've sewn this side. So now I'm going to push the work over to the side that I've already sewn. We'll start at the toe edge, making sure that underneath everything's out of the way. Couple of stitches forward, couple of stitches back, needle in my work. And then I can start and pivot as I'm sewing. So needle up again, just flatten out the edges, just make sure that your edges are together, and that's where your tacking should hold your edges together for you. And then we're coming round to the section here at the back. So remember to curve your stitches because your foot pad is curved, isn't it? Oops. So it's quite an oval one on this one. I don't know if it's the way I've cut it out or not, but it seems to be quite oval. And then of course, once we're happy with that, we can then take our quick unpick and we can remove our tacking stitches. I think the feet pad are actually quite difficult. They're one of the trickier things to do, I think, when you're sewing your Luna characters. So grant yourself some grace, and if you wanted to, if you don't mind hand sewing a little bit but want the speed of machine sewing, then you can obviously do that. So I'm just going to take out this tacking, making sure not to damage my felt at all. Then is we are going to turn this foot round. Okay, and then once we've got all of the tacking out, which I'll do off camera rather than you sit here and see me unpicking things, then I'm just going to use the exit that we had earlier. We've just snipped around that curve to help it sit better, and then I'm going to put my finger in right the way through down towards the toes and try and poke the toe through first, because I find that that's better. So I'll put my fingers through and then pull it through, but I want to just get these bits off first. So we'll turn it round and then we'll stuff it. Okay, so I've got my foot here. Her foot pad has come out really very oval on this one. I have followed my seam allowance, but I suspect that I cut it out quite narrowly. So we'll see how the other one goes, but hopefully it'll match. And so long as they match, then I don't mind so much. It's if they don't match that it feels weird. So all I'm going to do now is start and stuff my character's leg. I always go down into the foot bit first, and I put a bit in, and then I'll use the end of a pen or a knitting needle or whatever, not the pointed end of a knitting needle, the straight end of a knitting needle. In this case I'm going to use this pen, and push it in and then down towards the toe first, so that we get a nicely stuffed toe first. So just, you're better off putting it in little bits than you are filling the whole leg and then trying to manipulate it into place. That's what I found anyway. Obviously you can do it your own way. You may have found the way that works for you, but if this is your first time, then working in smaller pieces of stuffing is often better. And I do like quite a firmly stuffed character as well, so we'll put plenty of stuffing in. I think it gives them a nice weight as well. I did speak to, oh no, who was it? There was a lady on my comments the other day, and she said that when she was doing the body, obviously it's a bit late for this one now, I've only just remembered, our person, and they said that when they do their characters for Luna Lapin, they put some rice, dried rice, into, well, they call it pantyhose, so perhaps they were American, but into tights, or like a stocking, that type of thing, and then hide it in the bottom of the character. Put a little bit of stuffing in first, then put the tights with the rice in just inside. Obviously not a whole pair of tights, just put a knot at the bottom and a knot at the top or something, or just wrap it round. But that's a good way of weighting your character so that they'll have a bit more weight if they're going to be sitting on shelves or what have you. Another little tip, you see, and that's the beauty of it all, isn't it? Having that community going. I mean, they're a nice length. Like, they're shorter than Hamish's, quite a lot shorter than Hamish's, I think. But I think they're a good size, so we need to remember that for Luna perhaps in the future. So as I say, plenty of stuffing going in, and then we're going to use that same ladder stitch that we've used before, and just bear in mind as well that felt does stretch, so you know there is a limit to how much we can fit in these if we don't want our characters to be so stretched that none of the clothes fit them. But make sure you've got enough going up into the joint at the top of the leg, and that you've not got a floppy ankle either. You don't want a floppy ankle. I think that's about right for this one. Okay, so we're back onto the hand sewing again. Back on to finding our needle and thread, and we'll use the same colour again as we've got for our character. I have got my glasses with me this time, so I don't need to go searching for those. Yeah. Okay, so let's put that little quarters knot at the bottom again. And if you want to go back to in the video then to sewing up the back of the body, towards the end of the body, then you will see that I've put chapters in the video for you so that you can go back and find that, because that will be a longer version of what we're doing here. But again, I'm going to just bury my knot inside the leg by coming a little bit further past the sewing. Then I do a couple of little back stitches. Oops, try not to get your needle in your stuffing because it will pull it all out. Just to anchor that knot in place. Okay, so that's nice and secure now, it's not going to come undone. And remembering we've got that folded edge of the 1/4 of an inch, so tuck your seam allowance under for your 1/4 of an inch, and then we're going to start, it doesn't matter which side you start on, just start taking a stitch one side, you stitch the other, use your fingers just to depress the felt slightly, and that will help you get through it a bit easier. And then we're going to then pull. And you see how that all cinches up along there. So I'm just going to carry on along here. I'm not going to carry this on video because you already know how to do this part, and it's in more detail in the other section of the video. And then I'm going to sew my other leg exactly the same way, and then I'll come back to you when it's time to attach them onto Otttoline. Okay, see you in a minute. So just finishing off my thread for this character leg seam for the ladder stitch, and I just thought I'd just run past you again. When you're finishing off and you've done all your back stitches and you're happy that is nice and secure, not going to come undone, the reason why I push my needle through the work, or through the leg in this case, and come out the other side, is because I want a really long tail on that piece of thread. So if you think about it, normally we cut it off close, don't we, to the edge of the stitching line in order to stop it. But if we do that, there's more chance of it unravelling if it's just a short end quite close to those stitches and those seams. By pushing your needle through into the character's body wherever and coming out the other side, we're giving about an inch onto that. So we're giving that width, aren't we, there onto the length of the tail. And then if we just put a little bit of pressure on and then snip, the thread just pulls back into the into the leg. And what that means is that at the end of that seam, you've got an inch-long thread, piece of thread that's got to come loose all the way through the body first before it can start unravelling your stitches down your seam. If you just snip it off here, it's not got so far to travel to undo. So that's again, I like to tell you the reasons why we're doing things, not just why, you know, that you should do it, and that way then you've got a nice long piece of thread hidden inside the leg, and there's time for that thread to get mixed up with the stuffing as well, which will anchor it down even more and hold on to it, but it gives you a really nice finish. So I just pop back just to tell you that. Let me finish my other leg and we'll be there to attach these onto Otttoline. Okay, so I've got 2 legs now all finished. They're the same length, which is always a good thing. And also the feet pads on both of them, because they've both been put in the same way and they've both been cut out at the same time, they're pretty even as well on their size. So I'm not going to worry about those too much. If you feel any of your stitches are a bit loose or a bit gappy at the point at that Y seam at the back there or at the front, then again you can just do a few hand stitches, a bit like the ladder stitch that we've done, and just close those up just to make sure no stuffing's going to come out. The other thing I was going to mention as well is a couple of things. One is that when you're doing your ladder stitch, make sure you stick to your seam allowance, because otherwise you're going to give you might pinch in your leg a little bit more at that point, which will give it a strange shape, or you might be too generous and give her a bit of a bulk on there. But also, so that's important. Sticking to your seam allowance is important when you're wanting 2 identical things like the legs as well, because you want them to be the same size and thickness apparently. Not apparently. You want them to be the same size and thickness. So if you go over, do too generous of a 3/4 of an inch seam allowance, your finished leg is going to be narrower than intended on this. And the same thing if you don't use all of your 3/4 your 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, your leg will be slightly fatter than intended by the pattern. And whilst that's not an issue whilst your character's in this state, when you're wanting to put it into trousers or into one of the outfits, if the arm is too thick perhaps, then the dress might not fit, or the top might not fit your character. So just be aware of those points. Accuracy is something that comes with practice, but if you pay attention to it, it's really important as well, and especially when you come on to dressmaking in the future, it will be important. The other thing is you can tell how stuffed your character is by giving it a bit of a squeeze. So if you squeeze one on the ankle and squeeze one on the other and you don't think they're the same, before you close them up you can just add a bit more stuffing into those. But luckily I followed all my own tips and I've got everything all sorted. So we're now going to put Ottoline's legs on for her. So to do this, I'm going to use the longest of my doll needles, because I've tried this before with a shorter one and I find the longer one works better. The only thing that you have got to be careful of is if you're using buttons, get the 2 biggest ones out of the kit, is you need to make sure that there's plenty of room for your needle to go through, especially with once we get those threads through there as well that we're going to be having. So just check your needle first on your buttons. The next thing that you also could use, excuse my squeaky chair yet again, is I use this extra strong thread that I've bought, which is a Coates's Epic Thread 050. I think it's a light upholstery thread. It's polyester, but it is so thick. I can't actually break that with my fingers. I don't know if you can see the marks that are being left on my fingers from trying to break that. So this is my chosen and preferred thread for using for sewing on the limbs, just because it's just so strong. So we're going to take probably about a 2 metre piece of thread, 2 metre when it's doubled, so probably, yeah, a really long piece of thread, because each stitch has got to go through 2 legs and through the body, so each stitch is literally 4 or 5 inches long. So let's do 1, 2, 3, 4. You do have to be careful because you can get in a bit of a mess with it. And slip that off. There's no way I can break that with my fingers. And I'm going to pop that through my needle. I can thread this one now. That's good, isn't it? So just keep that, don't let that get tangled up as you're using it. And then I'm not going to do a quilter's knot on the end of this one, because trying to get that all the way along that needle will be too long. So I'm just going to do an old-fashioned type of knot. And we've got that on the bottom there, perhaps double that up. So we've got a nice big one that's not going to pull through the thread. And just make sure that it's just lying flat, so you're not going to get bubbles in it each time you use it. Now the first thing that I do when I'm doing this is we're trying to position the leg. You don't want your legs toes down either, so make sure you've got your legs toes up. Is I start off by securing my thread through my character first. So I'll literally put my needle through in approximately the same place. So I use the dart as a bit of a guide, so I'm going about 1/2 inch from the dart end and 1/2 inch from the dart end that way. And then the problem is that as we start to pull on this, because the felt isn't that dense, as soon as we pull, that's going to pull the knot through into the fabric. So I've actually lost my knot in there already. I can see the hole where it made it, but I'm not pulling it all the way through. Leave that knot in the middle. Go back through again where you've literally just taken a little bite of the felt where you came out, and locate that kind of hole that you went in on, and you're trying to come out in that same vicinity. Because what we're doing is we're doing a couple of stitches first just to anchor this thread down first, and then one more. You can start and see a little bit of an indentation where we've started to go through. Just be careful because with these needles, because they are pretty lethal. So they're just so big, you could do yourself a real mischief with these. Okay, that will do. Right, so the next thing then that I'm going to do is locate a leg, get it the right way up, and then I'm going to go through where my tailor's tack is and come through on the other side where my tailor's tack is. I'm going to thread my button on. Now you can do a couple of stitches without the button on if you want to, but because we've got those threads anchored on already, I think we're doing okay. And I'm doing a crisscross pattern with mine, so I'm going diagonally across my buttonholes, just like that. And then if we hold that leg in place pretty much where it's going to go, we can then go back through this leg again, taking a bite of the felt. Make sure we're coming back in the vicinity of our tailor's tack, and now I can take those out. Because we've used those now, we've now got our threads anchored. Do like to hold on to your fingers, don't they? And then this time when we cinch it in, if we don't get a knot in our thread, then we will get our button sewn on. And I know in other videos I have done it that we do the button later, so it's your choice. So now because these stitches will be hidden by the joint in the leg, we can now take quite a bite of the felt, and we're going to come out in the vicinity of the other leg where we want that to be, and pull our thread through, and you start to see why you need so much thread. And now we're going to go through the other leg, so making sure your toes are going to be up again, through the inside first of the leg, out into the area that we want to be. You can thread your button if you want to do it now, or you can do a couple of stitches without first, should you wish. And by a couple of stitches I mean a couple of stitches through the body. Let's take these tailor's tacks out now because they've done their purpose. We've got that positioning just right. And then I'm going to go back through the leg, taking a bite of the felt, and back into the body. So through the leg first, let's do that bit first, shall we? So the leg is still kind of loose from it, because we can pull on these threads to cinch that all in. Make sure that's all staying right. And then we're going to go back through the body again, taking a bite of felt. This time we are going to go back all the way through the leg as well at the same time, and we are going to come out through the hole in the button that we've already sewn. So sometimes you can get your needle through. Easy to get tangled up. Just take your time with this bit and just make sure you're not wafting your needle around too much, and don't have any pets or children nearby while you're doing this bit either. So that's looking pretty good. So just have a quick look at it to make sure that you're happy with how she is and that her legs are where you want them to be before we carry on, because now it'd be easier to rectify anything. Then I'm going to go back through this leg here, back through the body, and that should be fairly straightforward and straight ahead now. And then you're aiming with your button, because your needle's long enough to come out the other side, to go through the button on the other side of the leg. And sometimes you can twist, oh, too high. That's it, got it that time. And then we can pull that through again. Now this time we're going to start and cinch it in, because I like my legs to be a little kind of secure in. Just be aware, the more you cinch in, the more the legs are going to splay at the front here. But I kind of quite like that look. Oh, you see we've got a little bubble there. You see a little loop. So just separate out your two threads and pull on first one and then pull on the other. And you should then be able to tighten that up, which is good. So that's cinched in quite nicely into her body, so I'm happy with that. And then back through that again, and you're coming out on the button on the other side. And this is what takes your patience just a little bit, because it can be, you can think, I can feel the back of the button, so I know I'm close. And sometimes just wiggling the button around can help. Sometimes I'm a little bit too high. Sometimes lifting the button up and seeing exactly where the needle's coming out can help you with this. The good news is that once the buttons are on, when this is gifted, that's the wrong hold, that's the right hold. Once this is gifted to a child, the good thing about having the buttons there is that your threads aren't just onto the felt, because if you've just taken a bite of the felt and you're cinching it in, you'll know your stitches will go straight through that felt as quick as anything. So it is useful to have a button or something, just so that, because actually the thread is holding onto the buttons and it's almost the buttons that are holding the legs on, rather than going through the felt. So again, let's do one more stitch through this side. And then I'm going to do another 3 stitches through, but going through from the other side. This is why we need a nice long piece of thread, because ideally we don't want to be cutting this piece of thread at the moment. We want that to be just one complete piece. Just makes it easier, doesn't it? Just to not have to stop and start again. So see, I'm coming out too low here. So I take my needle back in again, change the direction slightly, and in theory we can see where we're going to. That's the other hold, don't want that one. There we go. So eventually you get there. It's just a keep it going kind of thing. And this time I'm going the other orientation to do the cross in the centre of her legs. I keep calling her because in the book she's called Otttoline, so she's intended as a female character. But if you're making this otter, absolutely, it is a unisex character. It can be Otto or Otttoline, whichever you prefer, or just gender neutral. It doesn't have to have a he or a she, does it? It can just be a they. But yeah, that's why I keep saying she, so apologies, I don't mean to offend anybody. Right, so another stitch there. So I've got 2 this side and 2 the other. So I'm trying to match the number of stitches going through so that the cotton, the thread in the centre of the buttons, looks the same thickness. Because at the moment, you see, we've only got 1 stitch going across the other way and multiple the other. There we go. She's going to be nice and firm, this character is, because that felt is really nice. I think it feels like it's like a herdwick or something like that. It feels like it's a lovely stiff quality wool felt. I'm very happy with that. That's the wrong hold. Can I twist it slightly? hope you can see all of this. I keep moving around so that I can see, and I keep forgetting that you guys want to see too. Wrong hole. So if I twist that round slightly, there we go, we can make it the right one, can't we? Right, I think we're about there with our stitches. Right, so I'm happy with where she is now. I'm happy with how she's sitting. I'm happy with how secure the buttons are on either side. So this time I'm going to go through the hole, but I'm going to come out on her inner thigh. And then I'm going to take a few stitches almost just through the felt on her inner thigh around where we've been stitching her. And 3 or 4 little back stitches should help, because this thread's so strong and because we've been through it several times on either side going through those buttons, then I don't have a concern that it's going to break or come undone. So I'm just trying to go through the inside thigh really, I'm not going backwards and forwards across the body, I'm just doing a few stitches around just through the leg fabric, just to start to do that. And then again, now that that's fastened off, I'm now going to poke inside her and I'm going to miss the other leg, so the needle's going in on the inner thigh but coming out this side, and then we are then going to put the pressure on the thread and snip it, and the ends will drop inside. And again, we've got that nice long end to the threads that I like. I like to have those buried inside my characters so that they don't come to the surface too quickly. So let me tidy up a little bit, because Otttoline would like some arms. So the next stage we're on to now is onto her arms. So let's get that ready. She's coming together, she's looking great. And then we've got her tail to do as well, of course, haven't we? So we're nearly there. So let's get on with your arms, Otttoline. Okay, so we've got our 4 pieces of arms. We've got 2 pairs here with thumbs going opposite directions, and another pair here thumbs going the opposite directions. We've got our tailor's tacks on here to mark the positioning that we're going to stitch through for putting her the arms on with her buttons. So all we do is flip these over right sides together, match the top and the bottom. We're going to use our pins, and exactly the same, I'm going to use my red pins to mark where I'm going to start and stop, and leave about 1.5 inches on these. It's about right for this thickness of felt. And then I'm going to sew all the way round, apart from through that gap. What I do when I'm sewing around here is, you can either draw on a line with like a Frixion pen if you wish to, is I match up the edges, and then I think of my 1/4 inch going round here, and then because you can't really draw your 1/4 inch on with your thumb because it kind of gets lost in everything, you can draw a line on that you're going to follow if you like. So I come in there a little bit and come round here for her wrist. So I've got a line drawn, so I come around there, I do stitch into that little bit there, and then I carry on stitching around here. So although there's not much definition on the outside, I do put that little thumb section on there when I'm sewing. And then of course I've got my red pins there, so I know not to sew between that section. So I'll literally sew the same way as I have with the legs, sew all the way round, all the way down here. I'll pick up my shading here for the thumb, come down, I'll pivot around here, making sure that I don't make a triangle, I don't want a pointy thumb, and then I got into that section there, I stop, then I change direction completely to come out round here, and then I'll stop it just there. So let's get this other one pinned, and then I'll start sewing. Well, I'll start sewing now, and I can do this one off camera, can't I, when you're having a go at doing yours. Right, so machine at the ready. Oops. Start at one of your edges, making sure you've got your 1/4 inch, and then we're going to reverse couple of stitches forward, couple of stitches back, needle in the work, because we've got some quite tight curves to go around here. And then we're going to start coming up here, starting to pivot because we're starting to get onto that curved shape. So coming round. So it's starting to get a bit too stiff for me. So press the foot up and just change the angle slightly. Not all of it in one go. You don't want a pointy top of the arm. You're wanting to do this gradually. And literally, as you get better, you can see I've got my hand in the machine and I've got my hand on my catch here at the back. Here. Oops, can't see it over then. Here, look, just under there. So that's lifting my presser foot, so that's where my other hand is. And I literally only lift it a few millimetres, enough just to twist that fabric without any pressure on it. And then I can keep going. And you get very adept at doing this. It just becomes second nature in the end. Straight line, so we can just come straight down here. We've got a bit of curving. And then we're looking to pick up this shading that we've done. So we're just coming down to do her thumb now. So I'll do one stitch across that direction, or two it went in the end, and then I come up slightly into her thumb. Then I stop, pivot and go completely the other way, and then come back down again and round, and just start to ease that. Oh, she has got a bit of a pointy thumb. Hopefully it'll be alright when we turn it round. And as you can see, you just start to get used to just lifting that presser foot just slightly, just as you spin round. So if you're a beginner, just take it right up, make sure you're comfortable before you put it down. But as you get better, you'll just lift it just slightly. I don't know if you can see it, just moving just slightly. And that's all you need just to be able to lift it to get it to do the change of direction for you. So let's just reverse there. That last pin out. Needle up. Snip off our threads. And this is what we've got. So that is slightly pointier than I would like on a thumb, but we'll see how it goes. Really important here to do your snipping because this seam is going to be really quite thick. So let's just take some of that bulk out. And just up this section here. Oops, bits going everywhere. And then around the top here. So this is why you need your 1/4 of an inch, because you need to be able to just trim this ready for turning, but don't go past your turning gap. Leave that intact because we need that for our ladder stitch. The other thing that I'm going to do is now that we've taken off the start of this, is I'm actually going to cut into it slightly across the top of the thumb and then into the thumb, and then I'm going to remove some more of that fabric just there. So can you see how I've snipped that so that we've got quite a bit taken out. I've not gone through my stitches, I'm almost up to them but not through them. And then again I'm going to put my finger down into the middle, sorry, my thumb, then I grip my thumb and my finger, so my thumb's inside, thumb and my finger, and then you can start to push that through into the centre so that we can then pull it out. Now we're trying not to put too much pressure on this gap because we don't want to stretch out that felt on that opening. Then once you're through, you can just push it through like that, and then you can use pen or the nice rounded tip of a knitting needle to push out the sections to give us that lovely rounded hand shape. Might be something a little bit pointy. I've got some tweezers here, but they've got a really pointed edge, so I've got to be really careful. So you're, rather than poking it out, you're easing out that thumb, so just very gently put a little bit of pressure on. If you put too much on, you're just going to go straight through your felt, so you're literally just easing it out just a little bit. Remember, we've got no felt to redo these, so we have to be very careful. So, but you can see you get quite a nice little thumb shape doing it like that. And then let's do the other side. Thumb in and finger in, and then we can just push that section out. Go back to the rounded end of the pen because that's quite a good one. Literally just get that shape going on for that top of that arm joint there. Okay, so we've got our arm all ready to go. Next stage is, you guessed it, we're going to start stuffing it. And again, I stuff down into my hand first, just like I did into the foot last time. So I'm going to put a bit in first, and then I'm going to use this to actually go in and try and get some into that. I might even use my tweezers with they gone, just to push some of that stuffing into the thumb. But again, be really careful because you will go through the felt or fabric if you're using fabric to do the bodies of these. You could use a linen, or you could do a quilting cotton. You'd have to still do the face, you know, the muzzle. You'd have to do that with a felt, I think. I've got an idea for how to do that, but I've not done a video on that yet, so I need to crack on and get some of these done. So I hope Georgina's enjoying watching this character that she's sponsored. I think she will be. So hi Georgina, if you're watching. Lots of love from all of us to you to say thank you for your video, for your sponsorship. Right, let's get this back to business. Let's get this back in here. So again, just give it a little stiff. I'm happy with her arm and the upper arm. I think we could do a little bit more in just there. And both these arms are similar, so remember to keep your seam allowance the same. And when you're doing your ladder stitch, remember to make sure that you keep to the right amount of seam allowance while you're doing that, otherwise she'll have a bit more of a shaped arm than you intended. Right, that will do once that's all set, I think. So we're on the raw edge there, so that needs to tuck in. Okay, so I'm going to ladder stitch this closed. You've seen that twice. I'm not going to show you again now. Just rewind back if you need to view that. And then I'm going to do the other arm exactly the same way, and I'll come back to you just to talk about putting the buttons on again for the arms and sewing the arms on for placement, but it's going to be exactly the same way as we did for the legs. So let me just get rid of this excess stuffing, and I'll come back to you in a few moments. So here I am back a few minutes later with two arms, same stuffed, ladder stitched down the back of the arm there, and just nice and neatly, and with our two thumbs all ready to go. Oh, fluff on this one. So I've still got my tailor's tacks in for the tops of the arms. I've located the two buttons that we're using for the top of the arms. I'll just tell you how big they are. They are about 5/8 of an inch across, which is about 1.5 centimetres, isn't it? So that's the size for those. I'm going to use my same strong thread again, but this time I'm probably going to use 3 meters worth. So I just did 3 arm lengths worth of that. And then I've got my dole needles here, which I didn't show you earlier. So this is the pack of dole needles that I've got, and these are by Hemline. And there was just the 3, one at 3.5 inches, one at 5.25 inches, one at 6 7/8 of an inch. So the one at nearly 7 inches is the one I use for doing the legs because it's a wider area to go through, but I'm going to use the middle one now. It's not quite as bulky. I would say it's not quite as lethal, but I think they're all as lethal as each other, to be fair. And this one has got a bit of a bend in it, which might be interesting when we're trying to do our arms, but we'll see. We can manage. Okay, so let's just spread that out and get to the end. And again, I'm just going to do that little, just do a little knot with my fingers rather than do the quilter's knot, if I can. It doesn't want to make one at the moment. It's going to go inside the body anyway, once we get that thread secured, just as we did before. So let's have Ottoline near us, our character, and let's have a little look and see where we want her arms to go. So we need to make sure we've got the thumbs up when we sew her on. We want her to have a bit of a neck before her arms come out. So I think around about there's right. So if I keep my finger on there and just put a little pin just there, I can give you an approximate measurement in a minute if you wanted. And then that's about the same there. So let's have a look and see. So from the back seam, she's down 1 inch. So the pin's in line 1 inch down from the back seam, but then the centre of it is 1 inch from the chest seam. So 1 inch from the chest seam and 1 inch down from the top seam is about right, I think, for the centre of the arm to fit. So that will go like that. Obviously, if you prefer yours higher, put yours higher. If you prefer it lower, you can have it lower. But that's, we'll see at the end what you think, but I think that's about right. So let's measure the other one. So let's come down 1 inch first and put our pin in. And then we've got take a little bit of bite of the felt, and then about 1 inch in from the back bit there. So that needs to just go back slightly. Just take a bite out of the felt. Okay. Let's do the same thing as we did before with the legs. I'm not going to take you through the whole process, but we'll just get started. So again, we're going to choose where we're going through our character, and we want to go through in about the same location on both sides and pull our thread through. And if you give it a little pull, the knot will just go into the felt. Sometimes it doesn't want to today, so that's fine. I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to force it. And then I'm going to take a bite out of the felt, and I'm just going to come up to the other side of that knot again. Oops, caught a hand already. I can now take my pins out because we've gone both sides, so I'm happy with those. And now, making sure that my thumb's up, I'm going to start on the inside of the arm and come out in the centre of my tailor's tack. So just move your threads if you need to just work out where the centre of that tailor's tack is. Let's do it the other way first. Let's put a stitch through first before we start and put the button on. So then another bite of the arm and come through to the other side, through where the knot is, and then we're going to come through on the other side in the vicinity of where we took our stitch before. So there's no button on this time. So this is how you can do the legs as well if you want to get those just into the right position as well before you move forward. Oops, don't fall over, Otttoline. And then again, because we're working on the inside, we need to do on the inside of the arm, come through in the centre of where the tailor's tack is. Make sure your thumb is going to be up as well when you do this. And then you want to stitch out of your arm, back in there again, and then back through the body. And we're going to come through the arm again as well this time. Just watch when you're poking through that you're not going to get your fingers all caught up in the wrong way. And I find this the easiest way of putting these arms on, just to make sure that she's nice and straight and happy. Right, let's take those tailor's tacks out before they get buried underneath, because we've finished with those now. They did their job. Those threads out. So we can still pull this away from the body and just get it just where we want it. Right, okay. Now, just cinch that arm back into the body. Now I'm going to thread, now those arms are on and secure, I'm now going to thread my buttons. So take the first one and make the cross in the centre of it. Don't try and hold it up to your character straight away, just leave it loose, because then you can go through on the arm. The arm is, the button's already tethered. Come up in the vicinity of where you need your next button to come, and then when you tighten it up, here's our button at the end of our thread look, and as you tighten and pull on the threads further from the other side, the button just automatically goes into place. There's the other one gone, hiding under my machine. Oops. Just be careful with your needles. So again, from the underside of the button, and then it across on the diagonal. Just leave it loose for now. It's on the string, it's not going to get lost, it's not going to go anywhere. And again now we are going to go through Ottoline's body and arm, or through her arm really first, isn't it? And then we're going to then come out in the vicinity of the other button. Try and find the right hole. And I don't know if you can see, but I'm just pulling the needle backwards and forwards with this hand, just as I'm watching on the other. Where's my needle coming out? Oh, a little bit too high. Let's take it a little bit lower. That's better. Then you can fix the button on and pull through. Just making sure you've not got any knots or anything in the way. Sometimes these threads do get tangled. We can tighten it up in a moment. So I think one of these threads has got a loop on it, so let me just separate those two out first, and then I can pull on one and then pull on the other one. Yeah, that's pulled that in nice and tight now. Okay. Don't tend to pull the arms in quite as tight. And then back in through the other on the button again. And it's coming out too low. In fact, that button looks quite low. Let's just move that slightly. With the legs, it is just a trial and error thing, just to keep that button needle going backwards and forwards until you can get it into the right hole. But eventually you will. Have to keep the faith. There we go. Let's just give that a little bit of a pull, and that's the good thing about this thread, it's so nice and strong. Holds that in really nicely. And then back in again through her body. This is the last stitch in this orientation. Oops, careful you don't poke yourself when you're not meaning to, because these needles, as I say, are really sharp. And then when I go in through this one again, I'm now going to come out through the other orientation on this button. I just stabbed myself if you didn't see. I'm going to stop the video now because you know what I'm doing, and I'm just keeping going backwards and forwards like this and trying to get this button on nice and neatly. Got it through that time. So you've seen the process, because it's exactly the same as doing the legs, and I will cast off my arms exactly the same way as I did for my legs. I'm doing 3 stitches in each orientation of the holes in the arms through the buttons, so that you've got that as a reference as well, because then that all then keeps the threads the same kind of thickness in the centre of the buttons and keeps that looking all nice and even. And then I'm going to cast off, and then we're going to talk about making the tail, attaching the tail. Okay, we're now onto the tail for Otttoline. So we're going to take off our pattern piece, and then we're going to fold it in half with the right sides together, because this piece in the book is machine sewn anyway, so we can just follow the instructions for this exactly as they are. So let's fold that in half so that these two long edges are together. Pop a pin in just to hold those straight for us, although it's a straight seam, so it should be fairly straightforward. And we're going to sew across the tail there and then all the way down the edge here. There will be an argument to say you don't necessarily need to sew across the end bit, and I'm not sure what function that would serve, because it's going to be quite difficult to get down to that bottom with the thickness of this felt. So I'm just wondering whether I skip that bit and tell you to skip that bit or not. Let me try it first. Let me try it without sewing that end bit and just see how it looks. So we're going to put our fabric into our machine, make sure our needle's at the right position to give us a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Yeah, I don't think you're going to need to sew across the end of it as such. Let's just sew all the way up. Taking our pins out as we go, and reverse stitch at the top and at the bottom. And trim our threads. The next thing I do is something called finger pressing. And it does say to reduce the bulk of the seam, but actually if you pull these two sides across and use the pressure from your fingers and your fingernails to kind of flatten that seam, that is the best way, I think, of opening this seam up. We also can get the iron out and we can iron it, but I don't think there's any need to sew the end of that tail. So let's just press that open, because then when we turn this round, we want that seam line to be lined straight. And it's going to be interesting to try and get this to pull through the right way. Anyway, let's use a pen to push it down as much as we can. Use your knitting needle, whatever you're going to be using, to push it down and through. Use my awl because that'll be nice and thicker than a pin. And then just gradually, I'm using the point of the awl just to poke in and just to ease out some of that fabric. You've got to be really careful because you don't want to rip the felt. But you need something fairly strong to pull it all the way through, because the felt's so thick on itself. Okay, it is coming. Just take it steady. As you get narrower down the bottom, it's going to get worse and worse, isn't it, to try and turn it. It's a bit thick. If this was fabric tail, I would definitely sew across the end. But because it's felt, and felt doesn't fray, nearly there, then I think you'll get a less... Oh, see, I pulled a little bit of felt out then. Just being a little bit too rough with it. So what I can do is trim those fibres off. Give it a nice, neat end. Okay, and then what happens here is that those seam allowances there are pushed open all the way down the tail, and then you're going to flatten it with that seam allowance at the top there, just flat. It's quite a thick tail, isn't it? You can over sew it, I suppose, at the end if you want to, but I'm not going to on mine. Right, okay, then the next stage then would be to over sew the edge of this, but I think I'm going to use a zigzag on mine. So let's set our machine up for a zigzag. So on mine it's a stitch number 8, so choose your zigzag. My standard stitches are 5, I think I'm going to do it as a 3.5. And my stitch length is set to 2, I'm going to keep that as a 2. So I'm going to make sure that I have flattened my seam allowance down as far as I can get it. We want that to lay nice and flat inside your tail. Put the edges together so that they're sitting nicely. I'm going to start at this edge and then it will sew a zigzag, and I'm going to sew right over the top of the tail. Put your needle in your work, but if you have to, you want to be inside your felt when you are closing this up. I want to leave some tails because I'm going to bury those inside my work. That's how it looks when you've zigzagged it. Because then I'm going to take a needle. I'm going to thread these ends onto my needle so they can't come undone. So I'll tell you what we'll do our secret finishing, and I'll show you how to do that. Oh, looking for my glasses and they're on my head. So what I'm going to do is pull on one of the threads, and then it should give me a little loop on one side. So one side you should have your thread, but it pulls it all through to the other side. Once we've got them on the other side, to get on the same side together, usually on the underside, then we're going to just do a couple of knots just to hold those threads together. And I'm going to trim them so they're the same length, and then thread them onto both of them onto my needle at the same time. And then I'm going to then go into the felt, but I'm going to go through and along this edge here because I think that'll hold the threads tighter. Can you see? So I've just got the needle through there. I've gone in just where the sewing finished, and then I'm going to pull it, and that makes those ends disappear in. It's the same theory as we did before, where we don't want the threads to poke out or come undone when they're short at some stage in the future. So again, let's see if we can find the loop of the other stitch. If you can't find the loop, and I can't, that might have been where it started, because when I change stitches on my machine, it does a few stitches in one place together. And then what we're going to do is just push that through so that both ends are on the same side, and we've got a nice neat finish. And now I'm going to tie my knots. That just secures those together. Make sure it's quite a nice little tight knot. A little tight knot. And then we're going to cut these off so that these are the same length. And then thread them through as well. Come on, you know you want to. That's it. Okay, got them through. And then we're then going to poke our threads through along that zigzag seam on the inside, just so that it just sort of takes it along a bit and hides it. So then pull on your threads and snip those. So we've got a nice little neatly finished tail just there. Now let me move my machine out of the way. So we've finished with that. Because the tail is secured with a hook and eye, not a hook and eye, a press stud, so that you can dress Otttoline and take it on or off if you want to. It's quite a big one, quite an industrial sized one. So I think I'm going to have the round circle bit onto the back of her here. Yeah, okay. So in line with the buttons, I'm going to sew this on with dark grey thread again. Got a decent amount of that. Just thread that on there. Quilter's knot, just to keep that nice and secure. And the first thing I'm going to do now is just secure my thread in. So let's just take a stitch through Otttoline. So I'm just in line with the buttons at the back. And just take a couple of stitches there just to secure that knot. Actually, that's 3 stitches, isn't it? Let's take the ends of the knot off, and I'm going to use the bit with the indentation to go in first. Now, if you can't hold it still very well, take a pin. Position it and then just poke that into Otttoline, and that will just, sorry Otttoline, but let's just hold it still for as well. We're just fiddling with the placement, because once we've got a few stitches in we'll be fine, but we just need to get a few stitches in to start off with. So what we're going to do now is let's go through one of the holes on the press stud, and then into the body, and then you're going to have to press down on the press stud so you can get your thread needle to come round again. And there's quite a few holes around the exterior of this to hold it still. And I mean, it might have chosen to have done black thread, I suppose, but this grey thread will be alright, sounds very nice and neat. I'm going to do 4 stitches in each position. And when I go down, I'm going to go in just by my stitches and then travel along inside Otttoline until I get to the next point for the hole. And then I'm going to take a bit of felt and a bit of, and then through the hole. That's 3. I think one more. That's 4. Okay, so now we've got it on, so now we can take our pins out. And now needle can go in again. Just make sure you keep it level on that seam because you want it to be nice and neat. And then go through the hole first, so the thread's going through from underneath and then through the hole. And then bite of felt, and if you just press down with your finger onto the press stud like that, you can just lift at one edge so that you'll be able to get your needle under to take your stitch. You need quite a bit of felt if you can, because that'll make it more secure. Make sure you don't get any little loops on your threads. If you do, just separate out your threads. and give each one a bit of a tug, or gentle pressure is more like it, until you feel that kind of cinching again. Let's go travel underneath, round to the next hole. And then I go through the hole. So I'm not trying to travel along and go through the hole at the same point, at the same time. I think that's just a bit too much to be doing in one go. So I keep taking it closer to me and I'm not sure you can see. So again, once I've done that, I'm going to do a few stitches, like little back stitches, around the back of her, and sort of like backwards and forwards underneath the press stud, which will then anchor those threads for me down. And then I'm going to take a big stitch through her body, and that will then mean that we've got a nice long tail that's got to work its way loose before it can start and undo any of the stitches. And I do find that's one of the better ways of casting off, because you don't get a knot on the surface either. Or it gets more difficult as you further you get round. Well, the grey thread doesn't look too bad actually on the black. That one's a slightly easier one. 2, 3, 4. So 4 or 5 stitches I think in each hole is probably going to anchor it down the best. And then once I've finished, I then go back into where the thing is, and I start coming out across at where each of those holes are. I take a little back stitch at each one, go through to the next one, and this is just doing those little stitches that seems to just hold the threads in, because the back stitches seem to be quite strong for not coming undone. And then once I'm happy that we've got that secured down enough, I'll take a big stitch, but be careful not to lose your needle inside Otttoline. Make sure you can see the end before you push it all the way through. And then just put a little bit of pressure on the thread as you snip it off. So that's that all nice and neatly sewn on. And as I say, that's just above where she's sitting and in line, just in line with her leg buttons. So then we get some more thread, because that's not going to be enough. We're nearly done. So let me know in the comments, is this the first video of mine that you've watched? Have you watched more than one? Do you enjoy them? Is there anything you'd like to see that I don't cover? Or do I race through some things too quickly? I'm always happy to have some good constructive feedback. Okay, so let's get that knot in the end there. And if you haven't as yet, I'd really be grateful if you'd subscribe as well to my channel, because that really is I see it as an endorsement of that you're enjoying what I'm doing. So again, I'm just going to let's start off by anchoring that knot down first with a couple of stitches just underneath where that press stud is going to go. Yeah, that should be fine. And then let's hold that press stud in place. Now the secret to this is now going to be not going through onto the top. We only want to take it through on the bottom. So let's put our thread through first, so we've got our press stud actually anchored onto our piece of cotton, because then it can't ping off anywhere. And then we're going to do the same thing. So once it's in place, let's take 3 or 4 stitches in place. And the good thing with this is that the felt is quite forgiving, isn't it? If you were making this tail out of fabric, I would have left a gap here, sewn the top, sewn over the bottom if you want to, and down so far, and then down the other, leave a gap here, turn it through, and then ladder stitch that closed. That's the way that I would, just in case you're wanting to sew yours out of fabric, not out of felt. Let's go through the hole again there. 1, 2, 3. Oops, now we've got a loop. So just separate your threads if you get a loop, and then just pull it and make sure it's tight. 4. So I'm just going through one. I'm not going through onto the top of the felt here at all. The stitches are just staying through in this bottom layer. Got a on my thread. Smooth that all the way down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then passing through underneath. Get to the next one. Through the hole first. And then do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, holding that on, then on to the next one. Wonder how many stitches we've taken in our lives, in total. Maybe it's in the hundreds if you're just a beginner. I think mine would be in the millions over the years that I've been sewing. Okay, and then I throw onto the last one, and then we're home and dry. And we'll have a little chat and just do a little round up and just show Otttoline off in all her glory. I'll make sure she's lint and thread free before I show her to you. So again, just to finish this off, I'm just going to go across to each of these and just do a little bit back stitch in each position. And it does just tighten those threads off and mean that it's not going to come undone. And then when I'm happy with pretty much most of that, I'm just going to take my needle into my work and just follow it down through the seam allowance on the tail, push it through, give it a nice long edge on it, layer left on it, and there we go, one lovely tail. So let's attach that onto Otttoline now. Nice satisfying click. So that's how that just sits on the back there. I suppose you could do more if you wanted, have 3 smaller ones if you wanted, but that's all that's come in the kits. That's what I'm using. And that's our Otttoline. So let me turn the camera around and we'll have a quick chat and we'll finish off. And so there we go, there's Otttoline in all her glory with both her arms. Her arms are actually quite poseable with the buttons on. There's her lovely tail and her legs and feet, her lovely face and her white chest and throat. And I think that I did say she'd be lint free, didn't I? But she isn't. What is it about sewing reams? Just collect threads everywhere, don't we? Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you have a go at making your own Otttoline and that I've debugged some of the problem areas that you might have thought you were going to struggle with, whether it's attaching the arms, attaching the head, sewing the nose and the muzzle, whatever it is that you think that you might have struggled with. I hope I've made that look and seem that as if you could recreate it, because believe me, you can. If you just follow all of the steps that I've shown you, then you really will end up your character. There's no reason why your character can't end up exactly the same as this one and looking just as lovely. I'm really thrilled with her. Thank you, Georgina, again for sponsoring Otttoline for me and for allowing me to bring this video to you all. I really do appreciate that, because obviously I get a lot of requests for characters and for tutorials, and my finances won't run to all of them, not all at once. So I do appreciate it, and you can make any donations towards kits. Everything goes towards the kits and the sewing. None of it goes in my personal pocket. It all goes in towards supplies for the channel, and you can do that through my Ko-fi account, and I'll put a link up just here for that so you can see what that is. There is another Claire England -Rees on there, just be warned, because that's not me, that's a different creator. I'm just Claire England, just on that. That's my name and my account. But thank you very much for watching today. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you aren't a subscriber already, and I think 60% of the people who watch my videos aren't subscribers, and if you wouldn't mind, I'd really appreciate it if you just hit that subscribe button if you have enjoyed the video today and you think that there was something of value for you on there. I do other videos on dressmaking, children's clothes, adult clothes, quilting, and also at some stages I'll be doing some more on cross stitch as well. But at the moment, most of the demand seems to be for the learning how to either sew or machine sew the Luna Lapin characters, and so that is what I'm concentrating most of my videos on at the moment. So from Ottoline and I. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for joining me, and happy stitching. Bye.